Welcome to Compact Warfare from compactwarfare.com, the show where we explore key moments from the history of conflict, from ancient battlefields to modern warfare. This is episode 45, the Battle of Crécy. The Battle of Crécy took place on the 26th of August 1346 during the first phase of the 100 Years' War. Edward III of England had landed in Normandy in July, seeking both plunder and political leverage after years of diplomatic manoeuvring and truces. His chevauchée cut a destructive path through the wealthy Norman towns, forcing the French crown to respond. Philip VI gathered a large feudal army, called in vassals and allies, and moved to intercept the English host before it could link up with Flemish supporters or retreat to friendly ports. The result was a meeting near the small village of Crécy-en-Ponthieu in Picardy, where a smaller, disciplined English force chose its ground and forced a decisive action. Edward's army was a composite of household knights, contracted men-at-arms, and large contingents of archers recruited under English commissions of array and from Welsh marcher communities. Exact figures vary in the sources, but a common modern estimate places the English strength at roughly 10 to 12,000, perhaps more than half of them longbowmen. The longbow, a powerful self-bow often made of yew, gave trained archers a high rate of fire and lethal penetration, at ranges that outmatched contemporary crossbows in sustained shooting. Philip VI's force was larger, perhaps 20 to 30,000, if one includes late-arriving contingents, camp followers, and allied troops. The French order of battle mixed feudal cavalry, led by magnates, mercenary and urban crossbowmen supplied by Genoa, and infantry levies. The French also fielded numerous banners, each with its own retinue and pride. The French crown expected a shock action by heavily armoured cavalry to break the enemy line, with crossbows to soften the targets, and infantry to follow through. In raw numbers, the French enjoyed superiority. In discipline, cohesion, and tactical preparation, the advantage lay with the English. Edward III crossed the Seine by guile, slipped around French blocking forces, and moved north. He needed a defensible position and a path to the Channel. The countryside around Crécy offered both. Low ridges, hedgerows, and freshly harvested fields provided lanes for movement and positions with clear fields of fire. Edward halted and arranged his army along a slight rise with flanks protected by woodland and by the village. His engineers dug pits and obstacles to break up cavalry charges, and his commanders walked the ground so that units knew the terrain before the first French scouts appeared. Philip's army had marched hard to catch the English. Many units were tired, some leaders were eager for honour, and coordination through the length of the column was difficult. The king was urged by cautious councillors to delay until the next day, allowing for proper deployment. Impatient voices urged an immediate attack to pin the English against the Somme and prevent escape. Late in the afternoon, a compromise was reached that was worse than either alternative. French units pressed forward piecemeal into a prepared defence. Edward arrayed his army in 3 battles, that is, 3 large divisions. The vanguard, under the command of the Prince of Wales, the young Edward, later known as the Black Prince, held the forward right. A second division under the Earl of Northampton covered the left. The king retained a reserve to the rear on higher ground near a windmill, from which he could observe and commit support where needed. Longbowmen were posted in wedges and on the flanks of the men-at-arms, creating interlocking zones of fire. Natural features and manufactured obstacles channeled the likely avenues of attack into those killing zones. The French formed along the road and fields south of the English position. Genoese crossbowmen moved to the front, screened by pavisees carried by assistants. Behind them, French cavalry massed in lines under great lords such as the Count of Alençon and the blind King John of Bohemia. Additional cavalry and infantry gathered along the road in depth, but hedges and ditches constricted the ground, making it hard to maintain order. A sudden rainstorm that occurred shortly before the fighting began further complicated matters. The English unstrung and protected their longbows until the shower passed. Many crossbow strings, made of hemp or sinew, slackened or broke, and could not be restrung quickly in the field. The action began with artillery, not by chance, but by design. The English had brought a small train of early gunpowder weapons, probably riboldequins or organ guns. Their noise and smoke added to the confusion in the French front ranks. As the rain cleared, the Genoese advanced and loosed volleys of bolts. English archers answered with a faster, heavier storm of arrows. Without full pavis cover and advancing uphill into steady fire, the crossbowmen wavered. When they fell back in disorder, French cavalry behind them saw retreating men as an obstacle, or, in the heat of pride, as shirkers. In the press and dust, lords urged their squadrons forward into their own infantry, and the line of battle dissolved into a series of overlapping charges. The longbow was not a magic weapon, but in the right hands and on the proper ground, it was decisive. English archers could shoot 6 to 10 arrows per minute, far faster than crossbows could be cranked and spanned. The arrows rained onto men and horses, found gaps in armour, and, just as importantly, punished cohesion. War horses that reared or turned aside from the hedgehog of stakes and pits carried panic down the ranks. Men-at-arms who struggled forward on foot did so under constant arrow fire that exhausted them before they ever reached the English lines. Where cavalry reached contact, English and Welsh billmen and dismounted men-at-arms fought hand-to-hand and held their ground. French cavalry charged again and again throughout the late afternoon and evening. Each charge had to funnel through narrow approaches, and each arrived without full support from other arms. The Count of Alençon led one of the most determined attacks and died near the English front. King John of Bohemia, blind but insisting on honour, had his bridle tied to those of his companions and rode to his death within reach of the Prince of Wales's standard. The prince's household fought hard to keep him from being cut down, and at one point, messengers asked Edward III to send the reserve to rescue his son. The king famously declined, saying he would not deprive the prince of the honour of victory. The story has a chivalric sheen, but it reflects a real tactical judgment. The English line was holding everywhere that mattered, and the reserve was better kept intact. Crécy is one of the first European battles where early firearms were used in some numbers. Their practical killing power was limited compared to arrows, but their psychological and disruptive effect was real. The thunderclap of ignition, the sheets of smoke, and the flashes among the hedgerows added to the sense of shock as cavalry rode uphill into obstacles and fire. Sound mattered in command and control. Trumpet calls, shouted orders, and the signals of banners had to compete with noise and dust. The more chaotic the soundscape became, the more the advantage shifted to the side that was stationary and already aligned. An essential element of English success lay in discipline. Edward's army fought on foot, in close order, and in prepared positions. Each division had officers who knew their tasks and who kept men in place when gaps appeared. The arrangement of archers to enfilade proved vital, as it created overlapping fires rather than a simple frontal wall. The French, by contrast, had brave and experienced leaders but lacked a coherent plan once the opening line faltered. Feudal retinues were proud formations that responded to their own lords before they responded to the crown. In a fluid crisis, this could shatter the unity of effort. As darkness fell, French assaults dwindled. Scattered groups continued to ride or stumble into the English lines, where they were cut down. Chroniclers record that the fighting lasted into the night, and that the field was strewn with bodies of nobles and knights whose names filled pages of heraldic rolls. The next day, English troops moved across the field and counted the dead. Among them were John of Bohemia, the Duke of Lorraine, and the Count of Blois, as well as many bannerets whose loss shook the political structure of regions across France. English losses were comparatively light. The disparity was not only a matter of weapons, but also a matter of ground and decision. Numbers for casualties are imprecise, but the pattern is clear. The French suffered thousands of dead, with a disproportionate share among mounted elites. Many Genoese crossbowmen were trampled in the first collisions. English casualties were in the hundreds, a fraction of the total on the field. After securing the field and burying the dead of rank, Edward moved to invest Calais, a port that would become the keystone of English strategy in northern France for more than 2 centuries. The fall of Calais in 1347 provided England with a logistical base and a valuable bargaining chip. Crécy's immediate military result, therefore, led directly to a strategic gain. Crécy has often been presented as a simple story of longbows triumphing over knights. That summary misses essential parts of the picture. English archery was powerful, but it was effective because it was integrated into a comprehensive plan that included fieldworks, controlled lanes of approach, disciplined infantry, and a commander who chose ground that magnified his strengths. French defeat came from more than frontal bravery. It stemmed from fatigue after a long march, the decision to attack late in the day, the disruption of crossbow strings by sudden rain, and the lack of a coordinated plan once the first attack faltered. Crécy should be read as a study in preparation and control, as much as a demonstration of a weapon's superiority. The death of King John of Bohemia became a symbol of knightly valour. The Prince of Wales is said to have adopted the crest of the blind king, 3 ostrich feathers with the motto Ich diene, I serve, which later became associated with the English heir apparent. Whether the details are strictly accurate or later embellished, they reflect the way contemporaries framed the battle. Crécy marked a transition from battles decided by individual feats of arms to battles decided by firepower, discipline, and chosen ground. It did not end chivalry, but it tempered it with the realities of massed missile fire and combined arms. Crécy weakened the French nobility and compelled the crown to reassess how it raised and organized armies. The need for paid, trained infantry and improved coordination between arms became increasingly difficult to ignore. For England, the victory confirmed the effectiveness of contracted service, archery-centered tactics, and defensive battles on chosen terrain. It also boosted the prestige of the young Prince of Wales, who would later command in further campaigns. Diplomatically, Crécy strengthened Edward's bargaining position in negotiations that would punctuate the long war, even though the wider conflict would ebb and flow for decades, marked by plague, fiscal strain, and shifting alliances. Genoese crossbowmen fought on the French side as mercenary professionals, and their poor showing at Crécy has often been blamed on cowardice. A more balanced view notes that they were sent forward without full Pavise support, without time to restring after rain, and against an enemy whose archers were already aligned on higher ground. Urban militia from French towns and Flemish contingents on other occasions show that this war often involved multinational forces, each with its own equipment, doctrine, and expectations. The challenge for commanders lay in integrating these parts. At Crécy, the English achieved that integration. The French did not. Edward's march had been destructive, but his halt at Crécy showed careful attention to supply and readiness. Units were fed and watered, bowstrings were kept dry, pits and stakes were placed, and the army rested. Philip's army was still in motion, bridging streams, clearing lanes, and assembling for battle when the decision to attack was taken. Small details mattered. A cup of wine and a mouthful of bread for an archer before he took his place could mean a steadier hand at the string. A commander who walked the front and spoke to captains gave confidence that the plan was clear. Crécy rewards study at this practical level. Crécy quickly entered chronicles and poems as a landmark victory. It joined the list of English battlefield successes that would later include Poitiers and Agincourt. In France, it became a cautionary tale about rash assault and the limits of valour without discipline. The landscape around Crécy still bears traces of the medieval fields and lanes, and local memory preserves the sites of the windmill and the ridges. For military historians, Crécy stands at the intersection of older and newer ways of war, with missile troops and early cannon playing roles that would only grow in the centuries to come. A single weapon or a single charge did not win the Battle of Crécy. It was won by a commander who chose ground that favoured his strengths, by units that held their positions under pressure, and by a system that integrated archers, men-at-arms, and simple fieldworks into a cohesive defence. The French did not lack courage. They lacked the time and structure to bring their numbers to bear in a coordinated way. Crécy, therefore, became a lesson in patience, preparation, and the value of making the enemy fight on your terms. Its echoes run through later English victories and through the gradual shift in European warfare toward planned firepower, disciplined infantry, and the careful use of terrain. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Compact Warfare from compactwarfare.com. If you did, please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.